Hello. So today let's talk about the Canon RF 24-105 f4 L series standard zoom lens. Now I've been shooting with this lens professionally for the last 2 or 3 years. Shot assignments all across the UK and overseas. In fact, I've just come back from another big overseas assignment with this lens. And I shot probably 75% of everything with this particular lens. It takes me a while of using these things to be able to, I guess, consolidate all of my thoughts, and I like to make these video reviews based on experience rather than specs and what other people say. It's just kind of my opinion, but my opinion gained from many hours behind the camera and shooting multiple assignments. Everyone will have different opinions. These are just mine. If you want the long story shortened, it's great. Go and buy one. If you've got an interest in it and you think that this is the lens that will solve your problems, then it probably will. That's the short story. If you want a bit of a deeper dive, then let's dive into the video. But to begin with, I'm just going to show you a bit of a random little selection of pictures, just some random stuff that I've captured with this lens over the last few years, just to give you an idea of kind of the range of work, I guess, that I've been shooting with it. So here we go. Okay, let's talk a little bit about history, or in particular my history of standard zooms and Canon cameras over the last 30 years. Good Lord, it sounds really boring when you say it like that. I hope you have an interest. If you don't, go and find something more interesting to do. There must be something more interesting to do than listen to me rattle on about this stuff. Anyway, over that time, I have used pretty much every standard zoom that Canon have had to offer, and some of the other manufacturers. And to be honest, I've always been a bit disappointed. There's always been something that's been wrong. Something that's meant that I've had to carry multiple other lenses with me. Either they've not been sharp enough, image quality hasn't been good enough, they've been a bit dark, they've been a bit heavy, they've been too big or too expensive, or often I've had problems with focusing not being quite accurate, so the sharpness isn't there. All of those things, and sometimes a combination of all of those things, and sometimes some other issues that I probably have forgotten. But I've never been happy. I finally settled on the 24-70-2.8, which, like a lot of professionals, kind of became their sort of standard zoom. And that was okay. My version was sharp enough, and it got great use over many years. But it was never long enough. 70mm was never long enough, and that always annoyed me because I had to carry another telephoto lens. Now I don't mind that because I like shooting with lots of different lenses, but always the holy grail was to have one lens, a Swiss Army knife of lenses that would do everything, that I wouldn't have to worry about other lenses at all. It was always kind of there in the back of my mind, will this one day be possible? So then along came the 24-105 EF lens, the forerunner of this, and I used that for the longest time. Now that was a tricky lens because there were multiple different build quality versions of that lens. So some were good, some were bad. I've had bad ones and I've had good ones, and the last one I had and still have and used my Canon 5D Mark IV is sharp, but it's still a bit of a compromise. It's okay, but I never really liked the pictures hugely that come out of it. Had a few focus issues from time to time. Always felt a little bit dark, but it was okay. Got the job done, don't get me wrong. And a lot of people compare those old EF lenses with this thing and say they're actually pretty much the same. Now, I will put my neck on the line and say I don't think they are. I think this thing is far superior to the previous EF version. And we'll go on to talk about handling and what's good about it and what's bad about it. Let's dive on in. Okay, so in the hand, this lens is slightly chunky, and yet it just kind of is a reasonable size. It doesn't ever feel like it's too big. It feels like it's annoyingly wide when you're trying to change it, but that's just a matter of retraining your brain to accept the size of this thing. The zoom control is really nicely weighted and is exactly where you want it, with just about the right amount of throw. And the focusing ring that you probably will never use, I don't know how often I've used it, very rarely, is nicely weighted as well. And then you've got the control ring, which seems to do a great job. I have mine set to aperture, which is really nice, because it's another way of changing your aperture, or dialing in anything that you want. You can set it to multiple different purposes. And then it has a lens hood on the front. You have the normal switches on the side of AF, and you've got a lock button if you want to put it in, and the stabilizer is for image stabilization, on or off. It doesn't suffer with zoom creep, which the previous one did, which is really nice, or it doesn't yet. Maybe it will over time. But altogether, it's a very nice unit, and it kind of fits nicely onto the camera. Annoyingly, it doesn't have the big red dot that the previous EF lenses used to have, so I've Frankensteined mine with a great big lump of plastic on the side so I can see it if it's dark, to know where because they're quite bland, the actual appearance of the lenses, these RF lenses. Going on to image quality and sharpness and stuff like that, this is where this thing earns its keep, because I struggle to take an out of focus picture with it. It just works, and I know that's working with the R5 as well, and so part of that is down to the camera. But just in terms of a standard zoom, this thing just catches focus and never lets go. And if it's in focus, it's sharp, and it's sharp enough for everything. And so that's a really refreshing thing for me. It's just lovely. I've used this for all sorts of different things, and it very rarely, and when I say very rarely, I could probably look through 1,000 pictures on my computer right now from a shoot I did just the other day, and I'd struggle to find one muzzy one. Now, going back to all of my other standard zooms in the past, I would probably find, you know, there would be a few hit and miss shots in there somewhere, which made post-production really difficult because you're always checking for the hit and miss one. Whereas with this thing, you can be pretty much guaranteed, and that feels lovely. So the elephant in the room, I guess, is that it has the 24 to 70 to 105 range, which is very good, but it's f4 aperture, which it would be nice if it was 2.8, and they have launched an RF 24 to 105 2.8 now, but that is expensive. That's too expensive for me, and it's too big, and it's too heavy for me. I'd love to try it, but I don't think it's a lens that will be in my armory anytime soon. Who knows? You know, you never know. Let's talk about image stabilization, because the image stabilization on this thing, this camera, this lens is just next level. It's just so good. I don't know how it works, but it just works exceptionally well, and I don't really have much else to say about it other than that. It's just awesome. Again, the combination of the lens with the body, they go together really well with this R5. In terms of distortion of the lens, I don't see distortion anywhere. I'm sure that you'll find technical charts that show you distortion, or other lens defects. I'm sure somebody's got it on paper that that's what happens. But in practice, with the corrections in Lightroom, which kind of Adobe slaps a correction onto the raw files, which kind of does a little bit of juju to your files to kind of bring them back to where they should be in terms of whether the lens has got a bit of inbuilt distortion and it needs a correction. And that just seems to work really well with this. I don't ever have to think about it. It has the f4 aperture, as I said, and is that enough to throw the background out of focus? Well, it isn't, and you know, and 2.8 would be nice, or you know, wider would be nice. But there is this compromise when you're a professional, particularly, where you don't. It's lovely to use wide apertures, and it's lovely to be able to throw the background out of focus. But you also have to take into consideration that you want critical sharpness across the most important parts of your image. So you don't always necessarily want to be shooting wide open, even though the temptation to shoot wide open is very strong. So it depends what you're doing. Everyone will have different thoughts about this, but for me, shooting at f4 is a rather secure way of making sure that most of my subject is sharp, put it that way. It's a little bit of a compromise, and you know, under certain circumstances, I will certainly use a prime and throw the background more out of focus. Depends very much on what I'm doing. But these days with software, there's a lot of possibilities. Now, I don't think using software is the solution, and everyone will have different opinions about this. I don't think that some of the things that are available in Lightroom should be used as a way of getting to where you want to get to with a picture. I think you should do it in camera, and I think you should do it with the correct lens. But there are tools that we can use, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. There are tools that we can use which make a lens like this with a camera like this even more versatile. And to begin with, we have the resolution. So we have a lot of resolution in a camera like the R5. So you might think that 105mm isn't long enough, but you can crop the file quite extensively. You can crop the file either in post-production, or you can crop the file by selecting a 1.6 crop in camera, which then kind of gives you like the equivalent of a teleconverter effectively, but it's a digital teleconverter. So it's just choosing the middle part of the image, lowering the resolution, but that's the picture that you finally get. And the resolution of the R5 is good enough to use that in good light, with good technique, with a good lens like this, without ever anybody noticing, apart from if you're talking about sort of critical enlargement. And I've used that quite extensively, and it works really well. It doesn't replace having a telephoto lens, but if you're stuck and you only have the one Swiss Army knife lens with you, then you need to use all the tools that you have at your disposal, and that sort of enhancing ability to zoom in or crop into the file is rather amazing. You also have the ability to throw your background out of focus now in post-production. Now, I'm no fan of this, but it is a tool that is available to us, and sometimes we need to use all of the tools that are available to get the best possible outcome. And if using a little bit of background blur to throw the background out enhances the picture, then I'm all for that if it needs to happen. It's not something that, you know, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about it. Kind of, everyone will have different opinions. The other thing that we can do is, if you're using just one lens like this and you find yourself trying to photograph a landscape and the 24mm end isn't wide enough, you can always turn the camera on its side and take a multiple set of pictures, either with a tripod or just by hand and with careful use, and then stitch them together in post-production. And again, I've done that, and it works really well, and you can get some very good results. None of those things are the most perfect outcome, you know, the most perfect things to use, but they are tools, right? So we use what's at our disposal. So the next thing that I want to talk about is negatives to this thing. Now, the first thing is build quality, and I mentioned this in another video, that I dropped this thing about 2 years ago, a very short little distance onto some soft ground, and it broke like a twig and just kind of had to go off to Canon. I couldn't quite believe it. Had to go off to Canon, had to have a lot of work done to it, and it cost a lot of money. I don't know whether I was just unlucky. The thing that I've learned with camera equipment over the years is that you can think that something's fragile and it will last forever. It might even be fragile, but it'll still last forever. And you might have something that you think is solidly built, and yet you drop it and it breaks and falls apart. I think luck has a lot to do with it. They're using plastic bits inside this thing to hold it together, which snap on impact. I don't think that's ideal, but I think that probably most lenses are kind of the same. I think I was unlucky. I should be a bit more careful. It'd be interesting to hear if other people have had build quality issues. I remember, I think Andrew Higgins, another one of my subscribers, talked about the fact that his 24-105 had gone wobbly on the end. Haven't had that problem yet, but you never know. It's probably just around the corner. Do you know a fix for that? Anyone? Is there something that you can, is there somewhere that you can tighten up screws or whatever? Be interested to hear. Other than that, there is no negative to me with this lens. I don't have a problem with it at all, anything that I could put my finger on, apart from one thing, which is that doesn't have the most amount of character in the world because it's a one lens solution. And because it's got the constant aperture all the way through it, your pictures can look a little bit normal as opposed to dreamy with some other lenses. For example, a 50mm 1.8 has an ability to instantly create pictures that are very appealing, whereas this lens gets the job done, gets all the pictures you need, everything's sharp, everything's perfect, all of the ranges are covered, but the pictures can be a little bit bland. This leads me on to my next thing I wanted to talk about, which is who is this thing for? So if you're a professional, I'm a professional photographer, the thing for me is that I need to get the job done. If you're a professional and you need to get the job done, you need to cover these focal ranges and you want a one lens solution, then you should look no further than this thing. It's never going to kind of be the most amazing lens in the world in terms of is it going to compare with, let's say, a 70 to 200 2.8 at the long end for capturing stuff that you need a telephoto lens for? You know, it's not. But if you want something that can cover the standard range in a one lens solution, then this is the one for you. However, if you are a enthusiastic photographer who is into experimenting with gear and trying out different things and wants to explore all of the different opportunities that there are out there, I think this is a bland option for you. You know, these things are about £1,300 new, a bit less secondhand now in the UK, maybe different in other countries. But for that kind of budget, you can go out and you can buy, if you're using an R body, you can buy an adapter potentially, or if you're using an EF body, you wouldn't need one. You can buy a wide angle lens. You could get something like the 16 to 35 f4 EF lens, which is awesome, secondhand. You could get a 50mm 1.8 secondhand. You could even get some RF lenses. You could get that 16mm fixed RF lens. That's wide. That's much wider than this. You could go out and you could buy a lovely telephoto lens, like, do you know the Canon R5 f2 L lens? A dreamy lens if ever there was one. You could kit yourself out with that budget with a much more interesting set of lenses that would keep you occupied for longer and enable you to explore further, potentially. But if you just want to have something that just gets the job done and you don't want to have to think about too much, then this is the one for you. I hope this has been of some use to you. I feel like I might have rambled on a little bit, you never know. But these are just my thoughts and experiences of using this lens. Subscribe, by the way. Leave me a like, a comment, you know, let me know your thoughts. And I'll be back with another video very soon. Thank you. Goodbye.